class. Okay, so the first couple problems, this is all absolute value equations and inequalities. So it should have been, not that. Okay, on the first one, right, always you have to isolate first. Remember that. Many of you didn't isolate. You just started breaking it into two equations. Okay, that's going to lead to probably one right answer and one wrong answer. Or if you didn't even write two equations, that's like not really understanding what the result of an absolute value equation is. It's always two answers. Okay, so you got to have two equations in there. You know, we said in class when you do isolate, you write your two equations, you solve, and you get two answers. Okay, if you check at that point, and I didn't really expect that you did, but if you did, remember to check in the original equation. Like, don't start in one of the intermediate steps because you could have made the mistake in between those two. And then if it doesn't check, what does that tell you on this kind of a problem? Not wrong. It's not extraneous, right? Extraneous is this kind of problem when there's a variable outside. If you plug one of these back in and it doesn't work, that's not extraneous. That's just wrong. You got to go back and see what you did wrong. Okay, this is the number two where you have the x inside and outside. That's where you might get extraneous. And we've seen before in problems, you don't always get extraneous. Sometimes actually they're not extraneous. But this one, number two, didn't need to be isolated. So you just write your two equations, and most people did that. Now, one other thing, not too many in this class I think made this mistake, but when you write your two equations in any of these, at that point, there are no more absolute values, okay? Don't show absolute values on that step because the whole point is we can't do algebra as long as there's some numbers inside and some numbers outside the absolute value symbols. So make sure that at this step, there's no absolute value shown. And then you have to solve. Now, if you look at your papers, you're going to see that a lot of the mistakes you made were like kind of arithmetic errors. Like you don't know how to deal with fractions. That's number one thing. Don't know how to deal with fractions. This one, if you solved, you got -1. If you plugged it in, it should have checked 2 equals 2. This one, if you solved it correctly, it should have been -7/3. Now, some people had that 3x equals -7, and they said x equals -3/7. So what did they do wrong? I mean, number one, you probably should have shown the step because obviously it isn't so obvious that when you divide by 3, right, that makes -7 divided by 3, not 3 over -7. If you made that mistake, then definitely draw the line and put divide by 3, and you would have gotten it right. Okay, now, if you had the right answer, -7/3, when you checked it down here, it led to the right-hand side being a negative number. Is it possible for an absolute value to equal a negative number? No. Now, some people, they checked here. They checked on the x plus 3 equals -2x minus 4. Okay, well, that'll verify. So that you got to take it all the way up to the original equation when you check. And you have to check. You can't just say extraneous and expect you're going to get all the points for that, which I should say every problem is 5 points in my mind, and you're getting some fraction of points in between 0 and 5. But if anybody could just like guess without knowing, put the word extraneous and say, well, I hope I'm right. Well, it's better if you like actually show the work. Why is it extraneous? Okay, the next couple were pretty straightforward on the absolute value less than and an absolute value greater than. Remember, absolute value less than is a 3-part inequality, right? Now, some, not many, put it as 2 different inequalities and then kind of did it all right and got all the points. But really, the preferred solution is write your 3-part inequality and then you solve for x in the middle. Okay, so the first step, and almost everybody did this correctly, they subtracted 4, you got -10, -1/2, and 2, or -1/2 x. So now you've got to solve for x, and I would say the majority didn't do that correctly, right? How do you get rid of a -1/2, which is multiplying times x? You multiply by -2. Now, if you say divide by -1/2, That is correct, but how do you divide by a fraction? You flip and multiply. So ultimately, at this level of math, you don't start saying divide by -1/2, you say multiply by -2. Most of you, or the people who made the mistakes with this, number one mistake is that this -10 became a 5. So you actually multiplied it by 1/2 or divided by 2. And because it's a negative number, it flips these signs going the other way. Right? And so some actually didn't flip the signs, and then over here graph the graph that would have been correct, but it actually didn't match your inequality. So it means something should, when you would have seen 20 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to -4. Can 20 be less than -4? No. So I mean, something should have prompted you. Well, that can't be right. So these things go the opposite way. Okay, number 4. The two inequalities, 1/3 x plus 4 is greater than 1, or 1/3 x plus 4 is less than -1. Everybody subtracted 4 all right, but many people didn't know how to solve for x when it says 1/3 x is greater than -3. You ended up saying that x is greater than -1. How do you get rid of a 1/3 which is multiplying? You multiply by 3. That's kind of just basic algebra stuff, and we made too many mistakes like this. You've got to fix that. You've got to somehow, not make the same kind of absolute, really silly errors. Because the higher you go, I mean, from this class to math analysis, calculus, I mean, you're just not going to survive. It's going to hurt. It should have been that -3 became a -9, that -5 became a -15, right? And the graphs are like so. Okay, now the number 5. The number 5 was an absolute value inequality. What's the first step to solving an absolute value inequality? Isolate, okay? And if you isolated, you should come up with this here, which shows an absolute value less than a negative number. Is that possible? It's not possible, right? So that's no solution. You don't need to do anything else with it. If you at least showed me that you isolated correctly, that you had the absolute value, just what I've got there, I gave you a point. But honestly, if you didn't, a lot of people don't. You're just not showing every step, so I can't even give you the partial credit in there. I have to show every step. Okay, the next one was the wrestling weight class. It says one weight class that will be wrestling at a wrestling match consists of weights between 152 and 160. Write an absolute value inequality that's describing the weight class, the acceptable weights. Now, we did a few of these in class. There was one on the study guide. Did you actually do the study guide? I mean, not just, I know some people didn't do it at all, but when you do it, are you checking? And if you're not getting it right, going back and making sure you understand why you didn't get it right? Because, a lot of people didn't get this one right because you didn't even write down an absolute value inequality. You didn't even have any absolute value symbols in there. If it says write an absolute value inequality, you got to write one. And then hopefully it's right. So if I want the weights to be between 152 and 160, then between 152 and 160, remember the tolerance formula was the variable minus the center in absolute value is less than or equal to the tolerance. And the tolerance is how far away can it be from the middle. So if I subtract the variable anywhere between 152 and 160, when I subtract, I get a number that's less than 4, or equal to 4 if it's 160. If I subtract on the left-hand side, I get a negative number, but the absolute value will make it a positive number. Right, so that's the formula. And that's really all the work that needed to be on there. Okay, I'm going a little out of order now because some of these were graphs, and we'll get to those at the end. But number 9 was what's the absolute value? And the function is y equals an absolute value function. What's the domain of an absolute value function? All real numbers. Stop. Right? Remember, what does it mean when we say that? It means that you can plug anything you want in for x. It will never lead to something that's not allowed, like a divide by 0 or square root of a negative. right? That's what it means. That's what domain means. Okay. The next one was, what's the equation for this graph? First of all, it's a v, so what kind of function is it? It's an absolute value. Second of all, it looks like it's been flipped, so what does that tell you? There's a negative coefficient in front of the absolute value. The sides of the v don't have slopes of 1 and -1. What is this slope? So there's a lot of you that don't know slope, and you've had slope for years now, right? Slope is the rise over the run, right? That's 2 divided by 1. This is -2 divided by 1. So the slopes are 2 and -2. So it should have been, the coefficient was -2, not -1/2. Okay, and then it looks like it's been transferred 2 to the right and 3 up. How do you make it go 2 to the right? -2 inside. How do you make it go 3 up? +3, right? So that should have looked like number 10 there. Right, just like that. Okay, then jump to number 14. Right, 14 said, okay, a baker modeled his monthly operating costs for making wedding cakes by the function. There it is. Find the minimum operating cost. Okay, what are they asking for when they're asking for the minimum value of a quadratic function? The vertex. And how do you find the vertex? -b/2a, right? And then plug that in. So here's the work that would have gone with that, right? So it's -b/2a. I would think, because I had to grade so many of these things, I don't remember like in which class some of these mistakes were made. It wasn't made by that many people, but some had the formula as b/2a, not -b/2a. And there was at least one person that said -b/2a squared. So it's just the wrong formula. You're not going to get the right answer with that. If you plugged in these numbers correctly, right, it would have been -12 over 2 times 0.5. What is 2 times 0.5? So it's positive 12 over 1, which is 12. Many of you, I know what you did. You used the calculator, right? You went 12 divided by 2 times 0.5, no other parentheses or anything. So the calculator did 12 divided by 2, 6, and then it multiplied by 0.5 to give you 3. You didn't use the calculator correctly. I mean, that's a level of arithmetic you shouldn't need a calculator for. But if you're going to use the calculator, you got to, remember the parentheses when you do that. And then if you plug in the 12, right, up in the original equation, then you get the k there, and we know that the k value, that is the minimum. Okay, the k is the minimum. So it should have been 78. Okay, then we get to the 15. 15 said, find the y-intercept. Now, the better people at math substituted x equals 0, solve for y. That's how you always find the y-intercept. On our last homework assignment, the last problem, actually we were converting from vertex form to standard form. And by doing that, and we understood that the y-intercept, the constant term, would be the y-intercept. By far, most people chose to do that, not substitute 0, but actually work through that whole, FOIL, combine like terms, actually FOIL, distribute, combine like terms. And if you got it right, that's fine. But if you didn't, you're really not using the way that you got to get in your head. How do you find a y-intercept? Substitute x equals 0. If you substitute x equals 0, you're going to get -3, 9, 27, -12, 15. That's the right answer. If you did the other way, and this is what you didn't do well, right? How do you do x minus 3 times x minus 3? You FOIL, right? Now, if I FOIL that, I'm going to do this on a separate, just to show. This is, it was a 3. Let me go here. And I got a pen going. So it was like this. Y equals 3 times x minus 3 squared minus 12. Like that. Okay? So if you're going to do it the other way, it has to look like this. Right? Then I do the x minus 3 times x minus 3. If I do that, the 4 terms that are generated are like this. Okay, that's if I just do the FOIL. I get those 4 terms. Okay, some of you then distributed the 3 before you actually combined like terms. You don't carry around negative 3x minus 3x. That's negative 6x. Okay, that's kind of a silly error. Combine like terms before you distribute. So it should have been like this. 3 times x squared minus 6x plus 9. Oh, and also some people get a minus 9 when they do that. They don't get the negative 3 times negative 3 makes a positive. Okay, and then what do you have to do? Distribute the 3. Now there was some that only multiplied the x squared, didn't multiply the negative 6x and the 9. So remember, you got to multiply everything in parentheses by that 3. So that's 3x squared minus 18x plus 27. And then you can combine like terms, and there's your 15. So there was a lot of, yeah, Jennifer. Not sure what you mean by that. Say it again.
Distribute the 3 before you.
No, you can't do that before it foils. No, you got to do that. That's an order of operations thing, right? Order of operations says first you go to the parentheses, which you can't combine those because they're not like terms. Then you go to the exponents, and then you go to the multiply, right? Okay. So that was number 15. Number 16. 16, what is the vertex? So this was really just a substitute, negative b over 2a. But again, we made a lot of errors on just the arithmetic here for 16. Negative b over 2a should have been negative negative 4 over 2 times negative 2. So many people had that written down there, but did not get to negative 1 as the answer. I mean, we all ought to be able to go from here to here and get that as the answer. And then plug in the negative 1 here. And then a lot of people ended up with a 9 here instead of a 5. Maybe you thought you could cancel the negatives. You can't cancel the negatives. Again, first you do the exponents. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. That makes that term negative. So these don't cancel. That's an arithmetic, order of operations kind of thing. So the right answer was negative 1, 5. Negative 1, 5. Right, 17. 17 said, does this function have a max or a min? And then, what is it? Okay, well, let's see. How do you tell whether it has a max or a min? It depends on how it opens, right? How does this one open because of the negative in front? It opens down. So does it have a maximum or a minimum? Maximum. So you get 2 out of the 5 for saying it was a maximum. Now, what is the maximum? Remember, the maximum is the vertex. And we can see the vertex because it's in vertex form. The vertex is 4, 8. 8 is the maximum. You know, that's a knowledge kind of question. If you know what it is, it's just like right there in front of you. No work to show or anything. But you got to know it. And then the number 18 was, what's the domain and range of this function? Okay, well, again, this is a quadratic function this time. This is the x-credit problem. What's the domain of all quadratic functions? All real numbers. There's plus 2 for you right there. Okay, now this thing has does this thing open up or down? It opens up, and what is the vertex? 2, 6. So if you just sketch that on a graph, which I did, I used that open spot. If you sketch that on the graph, number 18, there's the vertex at 2, 6, right? So what does it look like the range is? Does the range go infinitely up and down? It stops where? At 6. So how would you say that? Y is greater than or equal to 6. That's it. And a fair number of people got that. Okay, now when we go to the graph, 7 and 8, 11 and 12, and 13. Graphing. There's a fair number of students that you don't know how to plot points. You don't know how to take an XY coordinate and get to the right place on the graph. And you have to know how to do that. So shifted 3 to the right and 2 up means 3 to the right, 2 up. And you ended up somewhere else. And let's see, the slope is a half, so that means, again, you got to know slope. Up 1, right 2, up 1, left 2. That's it. How about this one? The negative means flip. The 3/2 means the slope of the sides will be 3 over 2, plus or minus. And it's shifted. 4 to the right, 1 up. 4 to the right, 1 up. Flipped, and the slope is down 3, right 2. Down 3, left 2. Okay, then we could, number 11, this is the absolute value inequality. Let's see. It's shifted 1 to the left and 2 up. So 1 to the left and 2 up. It's multiplied by a positive 1, so therefore it opens up and the slope of the sides is -1 and 1. Because it's a greater than, it's a dashed line. And because it's a greater than, it's shaded above. All right, and this one, it's 2 to the left and 3 down. Its slope of the sides are 1/2. It's a solid line because of the or equal to. And it's shaded below because of the last sign. Yes?
So when do you make a V and when you make a U?
Absolute value is a V. Quadratic is a U. Right? We only had 2 functions. We're going to add a whole lot more shapes to that. Okay, then the last one, it said calculate the vertex and then label the graph with the vertex and the axis of symmetry. So let me go back to the calculation of the vertex on 13. It's another one that arithmetic killed you. That was the function. So graph the function, show the calculation of the vertex, means find the h. H is -2 over 2 times 1/3. Okay, what is 2 times 1/3? 2/3. How do you divide by a fraction? You flip and multiply. So what's -2 times 3/2? The 2's cancel, -3. So I think some of you, I think you actually like multiplied by 1/3. So you canceled the 2's and then you said the answer was 1/3. It doesn't work that way. If you did it correct, you would have had a -3 there. And then when you plug that in, you would have gotten k equals -4. Right? And the y-intercept, just looking at the equation, is -1. Right? It's whatever the constant term is. So on the graph, it should look like, right, the vertex is at -3, 4. So that's 1 point. We sketch in the axis of symmetry and label it with an equation, x equals -3. The y-intercept was -1. Some people were using x equals -1. You got to know better than that. This is the y-axis, so it's right there. And if there's a point 3 to the right, then there's a point 3 to the left. Right? So there's the only 3 points you had to plot. Sketch it in. Okay, so let me stop this. And that's the end of the video.